So here's our breaking news. The U.S. and NATO believe Russia is poised to bombard cities into submission in Ukraine, which would mean many more civilian casualties. A senior Western intelligence official is telling CNN his experience with Russian leadership and Vladimir Putin leads him to believe, quote, they have a completely different standard when it comes to respect for human life. CNN's Fareed Zakaria is here. He's the host of Fareed Zakaria GPS. Joins me now. Fareed, thank you. Appreciate you coming on this evening. You know, in the outskirts of Kyiv, a business center destroyed, a woman watching her house as it just goes up in flames. This video is really horrific. And now officials say that Russia is poised to bombard these cities into submission. I don't even know. I hate to ask you, how does it end? I don't think we know, but not good.
Not good, Don, but not as good as the Russians might think going in, because the truth is you can bombard cities into submission. But one of the things that the United States learned in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, clearing is easier than holding. Once you barrel your way through, you now have to hold these cities. And that means you hold them block by block, which means you've got to have somebody there, because otherwise, every time a Russian tank or armored vehicle, goes down a street, somebody's going to throw a Molotov cocktail. Somebody's going to have the Ukrainians are armed. There are a lot of arms in Ukraine. So it's going to be a very complicated challenge for the Russians to hold a country of 44 million people who don't want to be occupied by the Russians. So it looks grim for the Ukrainians because the Russians are being fairly brutal. But the truth is the Russians are also going to come up against a reality, which is this is in some ways militarily for them an easier path. They're just using brute force, without worrying about casualties. But then holding this place is going to be really tough. This is a place that is much larger than Iraq. It is 44 million people, and they are determined not to be occupied.
Well, let's talk about what's to be done. I mean, because you've heard the arguments from a lot of folks. The NATO should be doing more. The U.S. should be doing more. The Ukrainian President Zelensky believes that NATO should be doing more, slamming NATO for refusing to establish a no-fly zone over the country. Listen, and then we'll get your response.
We believe that NATO countries have created a narrative that closing the skies over Ukraine would provoke Russia's direct aggression against NATO. This is the self-hypnosis of those who are weak, insecure inside, despite the fact they possess weapons many times stronger than we have.
Look, he went on and just said, he implied that any more deaths will be due to NATO's inaction. How do you see this, Fareed?
So let's understand what a no-fly zone is. A no-fly zone is essentially an act of war. What you are doing is what NATO or the United States, because that's the only country that could enforce a no-fly zone, would be saying, if we see anything in the sky, we will shoot it down. So what that would mean is an American plane with an American pilot would enter Ukrainian airspace and shoot down a Russian plane. That is a direct military confrontation between the United States and Russia, two nuclear-armed superpowers. That strikes me as a very dangerous course of action, and I think the Biden administration and NATO are properly very, very cautious about taking that step. Now, it's also true, President Zelensky is an incredibly brave man, and he's under incredible pressure. But the truth is the Russians are not using the air to do most of the bombardment they're doing. So the truth of the matter is it's not clear to me how much shutting down the airspace would do. Yes, it does give the Russians an advantage, but most of the fighting is taking place on the ground, not on the air. I would still urge that the most important thing we could do is to massively ratchet up the sanctions and to sanction the oil and gas industry. That is the source of Putin's wealth. That is the source of the Russian state's wealth. It's important to understand all these broad sanctions, a lot of them are hitting Russian oligarchs. We don't know how much influence they have over Putin. Some of them are hitting the Russian people. The vast majority of the Russian people have no say in any of this. It's not a democracy. They may not support the war. They may not support Putin. We have some evidence they don't. What we need is the one thing, the goose that lays the golden egg for Vladimir Putin's war machine, and that is oil and natural gas revenues. You have to shut those down. I think that puts more pressure on Vladimir Putin than even doing some kind of a no-fly zone, because they're dominant on the ground.
So, why isn't the U.S. doing anything about it? Why isn't the White House doing what you're saying?
Because the fear is that it will trigger higher gasoline prices at home. It will trigger an energy crisis. And it's an understandable fear. These are complicated issues. I would say, I think that the American people would understand that, what you have here is a superpower aggressor with nuclear weapons threatening to tear up the international order, threatening to essentially tear up the rule book, annex another country, alter borders by force. This is all historic stuff. This is stuff people will be writing about in the history books for decades to come, centuries to come.
But
Nobody's going to remember the price of gases.
You think the American people understand if their gas prices double, triple, quadruple, that if gas prices go up? Because I was talking to the former Secretary William Cohen, who said he believes that Americans should know, people should know that we have to sacrifice in these moments because democracy, freedom, they're all at stake right now. But there are people who say, why this conflict? There are conflicts, there are skirmishes all over the world. Why is this one so much different? Why are we involved in it? And why should we upend our lives? The price of our gas and so on and so forth. You understand what I'm saying?
I totally understand. And here's the simplest way to understand it. A skirmish that takes place between two small countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, they don't threaten to upend the international system. When you have a nuclear power, the largest nuclear power in the world, Russia has more nuclear weapons than the United States, a great power with a veto in the Security Council. When it threatens its neighbor, what you are reverting to is a pattern of great power politics that is more reminiscent of the age of Hitler and Mussolini, more reminiscent of 19th century Europe, where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. That is a very different world than we've lived in for the last 70 years, and certainly ever since the end of the Cold War. So it's not, to put it directly to people who think about this and they say, why are Ukrainians being why do we pay so much attention? Is it just because they're white? No, it is not because Ukrainians are white or European. It's because their aggressor, their invader, is a nuclear-armed superpower. That's the danger. That if Russia can get away with this, it can get away with invading Poland. It can get away with invading the Baltic states. China can get away with invading Taiwan. You essentially tear up the rule book of international relations. And one final
Paris, so then
gas prices.
Okay, go ahead. Okay.
The U.S. has lots of gas in oil.
Okay, so then I think to add to that argument, then, if you say if this is so important, if it's a nuclear superpower, then why aren't we doing more to help? Why aren't we supplying more troops at all? Why aren't we giving more? Why aren't we doing a no-fly zone? We should be the only thing that Putin will respond to is actual force. He's not going to be stopped through sanctions, no matter how many sanctions you put on him. He is determined to take that territory. As General Kimmett just says, this is not about emotion for him. This is pure mathematics. It's about force. He wants his territory. He's going to do what he wants to do.
Right. So look, what we're trying to do is balance the very real problem that having a nuclear-armed superpower, upend the international order is a huge, huge problem, and should be, there should be some very heavy price to pay. With trying to, frankly, ensure that we don't have a nuclear war. And one of the rules that the United States and the Soviet Union used during the Cold War, which seemed to stand us in good stead and keep the world at peace and keep nuclear deterrence solid, was that there was no direct military conflict between the two nuclear-armed superpowers, because the fear is that can escalate, right? Whichever side is losing will keep ratcheting up. So it's a balance. You're trying to do what is the best you can without risking a nuclear war.
All right. Thank you, Fareed. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Thank you, Fareed. I appreciate you joining us. We'll see you soon. We'll be watching you on Sunday. So
Always
Russian
good to see
forces
you.
now occupy